Hi guys, this is Mrs. Bartlett. I'm going to be reading Cracking Up, a Story About Erosion from our science kit. If you're in my class, this is a book that I keep on the front board, and I would encourage you, if you get the opportunity, to grab the book and take a closer look at it. There's a lot more at the end of the book that I'm not going to read, how to do some different things, some more information about deserts and other kinds of sand. So let's get started. The rocky ledge poked out from the cliff face, high above the sea. A patch of short grass clung to it, and bird droppings streaked its sides. The ledge had been there for a very long time. It was there when the Roman Empire came and went. It was there when knights built castles and fought battles. It was still there when the first steam trains puffed across the land, and the first aircrafts flew through the sky. From the very beginning, erosion was taking place on the cliff. Every spring, seagulls built nests on the ledge, laid their eggs and raised their young. In summer, the hot sun baked the cliff face. The tufts of grass turned brown and dusty, and the rock was warm to touch. Sometimes seabirds pecked and scraped at the ledge as they fought for space to perch. Their claws and beaks left little scratches and grooves in the rock. Each autumn, most of the birds flew off to warmer places. Strong winds blew in from the sea and beat against the cliff face. The wind carried specks of dust and grit that rubbed the ledge like sandpaper. The grass that grew on the ledge pushed its roots through the thin layer of soil and into tiny cracks in the rock. The roots clung to the rock and stopped the soil from being worn away. Soil is made from tiny, powdery pieces of rock mixed with bits of dead plants and animals. Over thousands of years, rainwater crumbles rock into dust, and this builds up on the land as soil. Without soil, plants could not grow. Plants help slow erosion. In winter, the days were cold and wet. Rainwater soaked into every crack and hole in the cliff. It grew so cold that the rain turned to snow, and the water in the cracks froze into ice. The ice made the cracks wider. When the ice melted, the cracks filled up with more water than before. As water freezes into ice, it expands or swells up, so the ice takes up more space. The expanding ice is very strong. When water freezes inside the cracks in rock, the ice is powerful enough to push the rock apart. This makes the cracks bigger and can break the rock into pieces. Below the ledge, the seawater rose and fell. Waves crashed against the foot of the cliff, gradually undercutting it. Each year, the ledge seemed to stick out more because the cliff under it was eroding away. The sun, wind, and rain wore deep grooves into the sides of the ledge. Its edges began to crumble. Bit by bit, the ledge was being worn away. It was being eroded. Water is heavy. When a large wave hits something, it can have as much force as a speeding car. As each wave hits the base of the cliff, it thrusts water into every gap and crack. The cracks slowly widen until chunks of rock fall away. Over time, the base of the cliff is eroded away. Erosion is the name scientists give to the way in which water, ice, wind, and sun wear away at Earth's surface and change the shape of the land. Earth's surface is made of rock. On land, the rock is usually covered with a layer of soil, but you can see bare rock in cliffs and on mountainsides where there is no soil or where the soil is very thin. We think of rock as hard and solid, but over hundreds or thousands of years, ice and rainwater wear down mountains. Rivers cut deep valleys into the land. Hot days and cold nights bake and shatter desert cliffs. Dusty winds scrub against rocks and boulders and erode them into strange shapes. Ocean waves erode the land's edges. Plants help break up rocks too. Plant roots push their way into cracks in the soil. As the roots grow, they make the cracks wider. Then water can get into the rock and make it crumble. One winter there was a great storm. Wind and rain lashed at the cliff, and the waves rose higher and higher. The ledge split away from the cliff and toppled into the sea. As it fell, it broke into pieces, which sank to the seabed. There was a creaking, groaning sound, and then a loud crack. Waves are made by wind blowing across the surface of the sea. The size of the waves depend on the strength of the wind. But the waves didn't let the pieces of ledge stay there. The water heaved and rolled and crashed the pieces to the seabed. This broke them up even more. The cliff was being eroded away. The storm died and the sea grew calmer, but the waves still rolled in. Each wave brought a surge of water that tumbled the pieces of rock forward, then sucked them back as the water flowed away again. The underwater waves were eroding the cliff. Waves don't only happen on the surface of the water. Underneath the waves, the water is churning around and around, a bit like the water in a washing machine. The pieces of ledge rolled backward and forward, until their edges were worn smooth. They no longer looked like chunks of broken ledge, but like lumpy rocks. Some were the size of bricks. Day after day, the tides came and went. When the seas were rough and stormy, big waves lifted up the rocks and threw them against the cliff, helping to erode it even more. Twice a day, the sea rises higher up the coast than at the other times. This rise and fall in the level of the sea is called the tide. When the tide reaches its highest point, it starts to shrink back. When it reaches its lowest point, it starts to rise again. Some of the rocks were smashed into smaller pebble-sized pieces. Then their sharp, broken edges were slowly ground smooth again as they rolled backward and forward in the sea. All this rolling around wore the pebbles away, but something else was happening to them too. Little by little, the water was dissolving them. Gradually, the pebbles grew smaller and smaller, from the size of your fist, to the size of an egg, to the size of a walnut. Rock is made of lots of pieces of stuff called minerals. Some minerals dissolve in water and are washed away, leaving tiny holes in the surface of the rock. The holes also make the surface of the rock weaker, so that it's more easily worn away. Now, when the waves lifted them up, the pebbles were so small and light that they hung in the water for a little while before sinking back to the seabed. When the next wave came, the water pushed the small pebbles sideways. The pebbles gradually began to drift around the side of the cliff. The side of the cliff curved back from the sea into a wide bay with a sandy beach. Slowly, the pebbles were being carried toward the bay. The water in the bay was calmer than at the foot of the cliff. Here, the waves rolled all the way on to the shore. The seabed was different too. Instead of big boulders and piles of rock, it was covered with sand, pebbles, and the empty shells of dead sea creatures, with just a few large rocks scattered around. Seaweed and shellfish clung to the rocks, and crabs, lobsters, and fish darted through the water or searched among the pebbles for scraps of food. Some types of rock are softer than others and are eroded more quickly. When soft rock lies between hard rock, the sea carves away the soft rock much faster and a bay is formed. The hard rock is left sticking out on either side of the bay. As each wave rolled toward the shore, it picked up small pebbles and grains of sand and washed them closer to the beach. The pebbles from our ledge were carried along with the rest. As they traveled, they rubbed and rolled against the sand, stone, and shells on the seabed until the pebbles were no bigger than the size of your little fingernail. Little by little, the pebbles moved closer to the shore. One windy day, when the waves were big and fierce, the pebbles were lifted high and flung up onto the beach. This time, when the tide went out, it left the pebbles behind, gleaming in the sun. By now, the pebbles were so small that they were the size of grains of rice. They had become grains of sand. Where the seabed slopes up toward the shore, the water gets shallower. In shallow water, The tops of the waves curve over and crash down in a mass of white foam called surf. Sometimes the wind or the tides move the grains or sand along the beach. Sometimes shore crabs scuttled over them, or shore birds pecked at them in search of sandworms. In summer, lots of people visited the beach and walked or played on the sand. One day, a child scooped up the sand and pushed it into a bucket. She pressed it down firmly with her shovel. She turned the bucket over and patted its base. When she lifted the bucket away, she had made a sandcastle. Because of erosion, the grains of sand were high above the ground like they were on the cliff, at least until the next tide came in. The end.